Hello, everyone. A lot can happen in a week. We talked a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East last week and the creation of Zionism. And over this past week, there has been a lot of, shall we say, escalation. I read a piece where Israel has deployed their submarine fleet. And these submarines are capable of launching missiles armed with nuclear weapons. So they're all out to sea, prowling around. Meanwhile, Russia has just unveiled another hypersonic missile system. This is all in the past few days. And there are 6 Chinese warships also in the Middle East region. I'm not sure whether it's Mediterranean, Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, whatever, but they're there. And it looks like now Israel is gearing up to go into Gaza to root out Hamas, which no one mentions that Israel created Hamas and funded Hamas as a way of thwarting Palestine Liberation Organization. It's complicated and it's a mess, and it looks like, well, it seems to me that the Anglo-American war masters wanted to get into a war with Russia over Ukraine. And that didn't work out because Putin played it cool, you might say. He didn't march in and blow up Kyiv and take over the whole country. And so they've started a new war front. And this looks like it might do the trick. Just yesterday, Israel bombed 2 airports in Syria. What does Syria have to do with it? I thought Hamas was in the Gaza Strip. Well, there's Hezbollah there. But this is the real spark, because there are 2 million Palestinians crammed into this open-air prison called Gaza. And if they've already shut the water off, food, electricity, so how long can people last without water and food? And now Israel is going to go in with tanks and try to root through the ruins to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people risk being annihilated. And I don't think the real purpose is to, find a final solution for the Palestinian problem as much as it is to provoke outrage among the Islamic Arabic world and to create a conflagration in the Middle East. It's no coincidence that Egypt and Iran and Ethiopia were accepted into the BRICS Plus nations at their September meeting. And so just a few weeks later now, the Middle East is blowing up. Now, it's looking like World War III. And of course, from my perspective as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, that doesn't compute with millions of Jehovah's Witnesses. There can't be a World War III. The Watchtower said so. And the reason is because it would go nuclear, and God said that the world was not going to be destroyed. It'll have people. I've talked about this, and that their reasoning is flawed. I won't go into that again, but obviously, the Great Tribulation is an extinction event that requires divine intervention. And what did Jesus say? Unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved. I thought I would give a little overview of prophecy, specifically of Daniel's prophecies, because they talk about what is to occur during the time of the end. And no, the time of the end did not begin in 1914, but it looks like it is about to begin. And it may have already, because it begins in a rather subtle way with a pushing between two rival kings. And then it erupts into a flood and a storm. So we could be in that pushing phase right now, which would be interesting. It would mean that the conclusion has begun. But the book of Daniel is interesting because Daniel was a captive in Babylon. And he was among the princes that were taken to Babylon before Jerusalem was finally destroyed. And he wasn't a slave in irons, as we might imagine, but he was being given an education, along with the three other Hebrews, to serve in Nebuchadnezzar's court. So no doubt they were learning the Chaldean language and arts and all of that. But Jehovah maneuvered things so that Daniel was made this prominent figure in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, and apparently it really disturbed him. And he passed a decree that unless his wise men could tell him not the meaning of his dream, but to tell him what he dreamt, then he was going to kill him, all of them, including Daniel. So Jehovah maneuvered that situation so it would demonstrate that only God could reveal this secret. And in fact, that's what Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar. The revealer of secrets has told the king what is to occur when? In the final part of the days, the time of the end, the conclusion. And of course, Daniel told him about his dream. He's the head of gold, and there's a breast of copper and silver and legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. And then a stone uncut by human hands crushes this image, striking it on the feet, toppling it. And Daniel was rewarded and for informing the king, because he was quite disturbed about all of this. But Daniel was given other dreams and visions to him personally. This was something that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt that Daniel interpreted correctly. But Daniel was also a party to these dreams. And we might think of the book of Daniel as a series of visions that become increasingly more complex and intricate. So the vision of the image is the simplest, and it gives us the rundown of kingdoms that lead up to the final kingdom. Recently the Watchtower understood that the feet of iron and clay represent the Anglo-American dual world power. They didn't used to think that. They said it just represented a politically divided world. Okay, but it makes sense that it represents an actual world power, because the head of gold represents Babylon, the silver represents Medo-Persia, and iron legs, of course, the Roman Empire, and the British Empire is an extension of that. And you add the clay, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and you have the Anglo-American dual world power. But something that the Watchtower hasn't really come to appreciate yet is that the image itself represents something. What does it represent? Well, the eighth king. The eighth king springs from the seven. Of course, in this vision, there's only five, because Egypt and Assyria had already come and gone by the time Daniel was in Babylon. But in Revelation, it draws from the book of Daniel, specifically the 7th chapter, because In that vision, Daniel saw a lion, a bear, and a leopard with 4 wings, representing these same entities, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. Greece was represented by the leopard with 4 wings because Alexander's empire was divided into 4 segments. Anyway, in the 13th chapter of Revelation, it depicts a 7-headed beast because it includes Egypt and Assyria. And that beast has a mouth of a lion, the feet of a bear, and the body of a leopard. The individual beasts that Daniel saw in the 7th chapter. And it's interesting that a 4th beast comes on the scene, and it's unusually fearsome, and it has 10 horns. But then Daniel sees a little horn coming up among the 10, and it plucks out 3 of the 10, and it itself grows bigger than all of the others. And it develops eyes and a mouth, speaking grandiose things and blaspheming God. And it wars against the holy ones and prevails against them for a time and times and half a time. In the 13th chapter, this beast receives a mortal head wound. That must correspond to the 3 horns that are plucked out by the little ascending horn. So it's a system that dies and comes back to life in a different form. But it's interesting, when this beast comes back to life, it has a mouth speaking grandiose blasphemies against God and against those who reside in heaven. And it wars against the holy ones and conquers them for 42 months. In the 12th chapter of Revelation, Satan, the devil, wars against the seed of the woman, the remnant, for 1,260 days. So those 3 time periods are all the same, 3.5 years after the crash, after the horns are plucked out, after the head of the beast in the 13th chapter of Revelation is slaughtered and then miraculously revives. And then we're given a vision of a 2-horned beast, which is the entity that comes back as the 7th head that was slaughtered. And it gives rise to the image of the beast. And then in the 17th chapter of Revelation, this image of the beast is portrayed as the scarlet-colored wild beast, which springs from the 7. So that's how we tie in this image of Daniel. It springs from those 5 before it, and the feet of iron and clay support it. Just as in the 13th chapter of Revelation, this 2-horned wild beast, the Anglo-American world power, corresponds with the feet of iron and clay, calls for an image to be made of the beast and for everyone to worship it. And it actually breathes life into the image, and it comes alive. Wow. The Watchtower has a very fanciful explanation for all of these things. I mean, going back to the 7th chapter of Daniel, where this little horn ascends and 3 horns are plucked out, the Watchtower claims that one of the horns that was plucked out was the Spanish kingdom, and it was plucked out in 1588 when the Spanish Armada, a few wooden sailing ships, went to war with the British and lost. Not so much due to the guns of the British Navy, but the gales that were blowing in the North Sea at that time. Well, what about the other 2 horns? Well, that happened later. Over several hundred years, the British also defeated the Dutch and the French. And that's true. That paved the way for the ascendancy of the British Empire over its colonial rivals. But here's the problem with that. France, Spain, and the Netherlands are still very much legitimate, powerful kingdoms. And in fact, France is every bit the equal of Great Britain. It's a nuclear power. It has a permanent seat on the Security Council of the UN. The economy of France and Great Britain is pretty similar. So how is it that these three horns were plucked out? No explanation on that. Maybe they were surgically reimplanted or something. We don't know. But no, these things have not occurred. The kingdom has not come. 1914 and the invisible parousia is an artfully contrived false story. That's what Peter called it. When Peter was talking about that, he said, it was not by inventing these artfully contrived false stories, but it was by having been eyewitnesses of his magnificence that we saw on the mountain. Speaking of the transfiguration. So that was a preview of the parousia, which Peter, James, and John were eyewitnesses of. How can you be eyewitnesses to something invisible? How could you be an eyewitness to an invisible parousia? Well, you can't. And that's why what the Watchtower teaches is an artfully contrived false story. When Christ comes, it'll be a whole new situation. And that's what all of these snapshots in Daniel reveal. Something that we have not seen, something that cannot be explained away. Well, the 8th chapter of Daniel is a little more detailed prophecy, and it refers to the breakup of Alexander's empire, and then a horn emerges from it, and we know the Roman Empire came extended from Greece, and the British from the Roman Empire, and you add in the American breakaway colonies that have been reabsorbed into this Anglo-American system. But this fierce-looking king ascends. And what does he do? He makes war against the holy ones. And he goes all the way against the Prince of Princes, which of course is Jesus Christ. But he keeps throwing truth to the earth, and he will succeed by deception. And he will bring the mighty ones to ruin along with the holy ones. Well, the Watchtower, again, it has a very inventive, fanciful explanation for this. The mighty ones were brought to ruin during World War II, and the holy ones. And then the holy place was set in its right condition. The Watchtower Board of Directors made some changes to the charter, the legal charter of the Watchtower. And theocracy was set in its right condition back in 1943 or 44, something. I'm not kidding. No. No details on how they brought the mighty ones to ruin or how the holy ones were brought to ruin. I think they mentioned that Jehovah's Witnesses suffered persecution and went to prison for being conscientious objectors, which is true, but the work went on. And no. No, what we're about to see, did you get the, has it dawned on you yet that everything is a lie? Everything that the government says, that the media says, I think more and more people are awakening to that realization. And I think we're seeing the fulfillment of the prophecy that this ascending king will keep throwing truth to the earth. Not necessarily God's truth, the truth that we hold dear from the Bible. There is such a thing as truth, right? I just saw this thing on Zero Hedge yesterday. Tucker Carlson did this piece. You remember George Floyd, a black man that was killed by that police officer, supposedly. And it set off what almost turned into a civil war. Black Lives Matter was unleashed. They were going to set matters straight, and they set cities on fire and killed I don't know how many people. Well, it turns out that the coroner's report his original report revealed that this poor fellow was not strangled. He didn't die from injuries suffered by the cop laying on his neck, which is standard procedure when you have a belligerent. No, but George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose. But the media and the government ran with this because they had an agenda. And just like with COVID, everything about COVID, I have to be careful on YouTube. I get another strike and I'm I'm offline for a week, I think. But now we're finding out that the vaccines were not safe and they're not effective. People that got the shots are getting COVID, and along with some other unwanted side effects. So we've been lied to at every turn. And it's interesting. President Biden, I won't even ridicule the poor man. He's suffering dementia. But he has a few moments where he speaks clearly. And he said that this was a campaign speech a couple of days ago, that we're going to create a new order. We've heard that term before, haven't we? A new order. He said the order that has existed since World War II is no longer functioning. What order is he talking about? Because the BRICS are doing pretty good. China's booming, and their Belt and Road is unifying Africa and Asia, and it's going to bring prosperity if they allow it to go on. No, he's talking about the dying Anglo Empire, the financial empire. It's bankrupt beyond anything you can imagine. And they know it, obviously, the trillions and trillions of dollars of government debt, private debt, public debt, corporate debt, it can never be repaid. For the last few decades, they've just been piling on more and more money to keep it from collapsing. But it's now in their interest to collapse it rapidly because another system is being set up. And they don't have their own currency yet, but they are phasing out the dollar, the petrodollar. And I won't go too much into that, but I'm sure you're aware of what's happening. And the Chinese are they were holders of like $1 trillion of treasury debt. And over the past few months, they've been selling that into the market, driving up interest rates, making it impossible for the United States, like $30 trillion in debt. The interest on that is going to be about $1 trillion a year, with interest rates where they are now, and they're going up. And the Federal Reserve can't even control it anymore. So at some point, and that's why they need a war to pull the plug on this financial system, to crash it while people are still holding debt. And I'm pretty sure that's how the prophecy will be fulfilled, that this king will bring the mighty ones to ruin, the millionaires and the billionaires. All their wealth is in stocks and bonds and cash, and it can all collapse very, very quickly. And they know it. But they keep it propped up. But Jehovah has something to say about that, doesn't he? The coming of Christ. At an hour you do not think to be it. It all comes down. Well, the last prophecy concerning the kings of the north and the kings of the south, they began, again, with the breakup of Alexander's empire, originally into four, but then they were consolidated into two, Syria and Egypt, and then Rome took over Syria, and eventually Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire. But Egypt was the original king of the south, and that's where the story picks up before the time of Christ. But in the time of the end, the king of the north and the king of the south engage in a pushing, and the king of the north will flood over and storm and have in subjection many nations, including Egypt. Wow. It's not talking about the Egypt that just became part of the BRICS. It's not really a big world player on the scene anymore like it was in Bible times. But because Egypt was the original king of the south, and the Watchtower knows this, Egypt becomes a symbol for the king of the south. So the king of the north will have his longtime rival in subjugation. And it says he will rule over the hidden treasures of gold and silver. Now think about that. The United States and all the countries hold large stores of gold. Supposedly Fort Knox is empty, but I don't believe that. But the United States is still the wealthiest nation in the world. Maybe some could argue that given the debt, but it's the grand prize, though. If you want to rule the world and take over everything, then you gotta bring this country down. And I think we're in the process of seeing that. When war erupts, the United States is not capable of, without going nuclear. It can't defeat Iran and China and Russia. There's no way. Again, without going nuclear. Nuclear. That's what President Bush used to say, nuclear. We're gonna go nuclear. Anyway, so this king of the north ruling over the gold and the hidden treasures after he brings these mighty ones to ruin. So crash the system, crash the cash, foreclose on the government. If it comes back to life, have it abdicate its authority to the United Nations. That's what they're trying to do with COVID, making the United Nations World Health Organization the supreme authority, with authority over all the nations to override national sovereignty. We saw a preview of that. And apparently they're working on another pandemic and obviously a war. So there are some big changes, and I'd like to help people be a little bit prepared. You know, there's a lot of preppers out there storing up, this and that. That's not going to cut it. I quote from the book of Zephaniah: before the day of Jehovah comes, before his burning anger is released, seek Jehovah, seek meekness, and seek righteousness. Perhaps you may be concealed in the day of Jehovah's anger. So Jehovah has a secret place, and a place of refuge. It's not a bunker somewhere, like the millionaires and billionaires have these luxury bunkers, It's a place of spiritual refuge where God can protect us from the chaos that is about to be unleashed. And so things can blow up very quickly, just as they have in the last week, as I was mentioning, the submarine fleet going out to sea, Chinese warships in the region. Yeah, boy. And the President of the United States talking about a new order. What is that all about? The Great Reset. And you'll be happy to have nothing. Well, I say bring it on. Because this is not a human thing. This is the end of Satan's system. And that's a great thing. But it's going to be turmoil like we've never seen. So maybe we'll see you next Sunday. I don't know. Thanks for watching.